A billionaire begged a single dad not to leave the hospital, but when she revealed the heartbreaking secret that tied her to his little girl, his world changed forever. Will her reason heal their broken past, or tear their fragile hope apart? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. James Walker's eyes snapped open in the darkness, his heart already racing before his mind fully registered why. Then he heard it again, the desperate, wheezing gasps coming from Lily's room. He threw off his thin blanket and stumbled out of bed, muscle memory guiding him through their small apartment even before he could flip on the lights. "Daddy," Lily's weak voice called out between labored breaths. "I'm coming, sweetie. Just try to stay calm." James fought to keep his own voice steady as he rushed to her bedside. The Mickey Mouse nightlight cast a soft glow across her face, which was already taking on a frightening bluish tinge. Her small chest heaved with the effort of drawing air, each breath a terrible struggle. James's hands shook as he reached for the nebulizer on her nightstand. The machine had seen better days, but it was all they could afford on his veteran's pension and part-time security guard salary. He quickly attached the medication chamber and mask, his movements practiced from too many nights like this one. "Here we go, Lily. Pad, just like always." He slipped the elastic band over her head and positioned the mask over her nose and mouth. But when he pressed the power button, the machine only gave a weak sputter before falling silent. James tried again, his stomach dropping as the nebulizer refused to work. No. He checked the power cord, jiggled the connections, and hit the button repeatedly. Nothing. "Come on." Lily's eyes were wide with fear now, her fingers clutching her worn teddy bear. James could see her struggling harder to breathe, each gasp more desperate than the last. There was no time to try fixing the machine. "Change of plans, sweetheart." He scooped her up, blanket and all, cradling her against his chest. "We're going for a little drive." James grabbed her jacket from the hook by the door, carefully wrapping it around her shoulders. He didn't bother changing out of his own sleep clothes, just slipped his feet into the first pair of shoes he could find and grabbed his keys. The night air was crisp and cool as they hurried down the 3 flights of stairs to the parking lot. Their old pickup truck sat under a flickering streetlight, its blue paint faded and scratched, but the engine still reliable. James silently thanked his military training for keeping him calm enough to focus on the immediate tasks. Get Lily secured in her booster seat. Start the engine. Navigate to the hospital. Just keep breathing, baby. Nice and slow. He glanced in the rearview mirror every few seconds, watching Lily's face in the dim glow of passing streetlights. She was trying so hard to follow his instructions, but each breath seemed to require more effort than the last. The streets were eerily empty at this hour, the stoplights cycling through their colors for no one. James pressed down harder on the accelerator, taking advantage of the clear roads while still being careful. The last thing they needed was to get pulled over. "Remember that story about the little engine that could?" James kept his voice gentle and encouraging, even as his knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "That's you right now, Lily Pad. I think I can. Lily managed the tiniest of nods, still clutching her teddy bear. The sight of her being so brave made James's throat tight with emotion. She'd been dealing with asthma since she was a toddler, but it never got easier watching her struggle to breathe. The hospital's emergency room signs came into view, their red letters glowing like a beacon in the night. James pulled up to the entrance, not bothering to find a proper parking spot. He rushed around to Lily's door, gathering her into his arms once more. The ER waiting room was harshly lit and smelled of disinfectant. A few other people sat in the molded plastic chairs, but James barely registered them as he approached the intake desk. "My daughter, severe asthma attack," he managed to get out between breaths. "Her nebulizer broke, and she's been struggling for at least 20 minutes. The nurse behind the desk took one look at Lily's blue-tinged lips and immediately pressed a button. Within seconds, another nurse appeared with a wheelchair. "Sir, we'll need you to fill out some paperwork while we get her started on treatment." The intake nurse pushed a clipboard toward him, but James couldn't take his eyes off Lily as they wheeled her through the double doors marked, "Authorized personnel only." "I should be with her," he protested, taking a step forward. "Please, Mr. Walker, let them do their job. The sooner you complete these forms, the sooner we can process everything." The nurse's tone was kind but firm. James accepted the clipboard with trembling hands and dropped into the nearest chair. The forms swam before his eyes. Insurance information he knew wouldn't cover nearly enough. Medical history he could recite in his sleep. Emergency contacts that consisted solely of his own cell phone number. He was halfway through the paperwork when the automatic doors swished open. The click of expensive heels against the linoleum floor made him look up briefly, then return to his forms. But something about the woman's sharp intake of breath drew his attention back. She stood frozen in the entrance, one manicured hand pressed against her mouth. Her clothes screamed wealth. A tailored blazer over silk pajamas, as if she'd thrown on the first professional piece she could grab over her sleepwear. But it was her expression that caught James's attention. She was staring through the glass doors where they'd taken Lily, her face drained of color as if she'd seen a ghost. The woman, who James would soon learn was Eleanor Hayes, took a halting step forward, then another. Her designer heels seemed to carry her forward against her will, drawn by something in the treatment area that James couldn't see. He watched as she pressed one perfectly manicured hand against the glass, her shoulders rising and falling with rapid breaths. James felt a strange unease settle in his stomach. The way this stranger was staring after his daughter, it wasn't simple concern for a sick child. There was recognition in her eyes, mixed with what looked like guilt and fear, but that was impossible. They'd never met this woman before. He would have remembered someone who carried herself with such obvious privilege and power. He found himself standing, the clipboard of half-completed forms forgotten in his chair. The woman must have sensed his movement because she turned toward him, her eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the empty waiting room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. James opened his mouth to ask who she was, why she was looking at his daughter that way, but before he could form the words, a doctor emerged through the double doors. "Mr. Walker," the doctor called out, breaking the strange tension in the room. "Your daughter is responding well to the emergency treatment. Would you like to come back and see her?" James Walker couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Through the glass doors of the emergency treatment area, he caught sight of a well-dressed woman staring intently at Lily. Her expensive clothes seemed out of place in the stark fluorescent lighting of the hospital waiting room, but it was the look on her face that made him uneasy, a mixture of shock and something else he couldn't quite name. The woman's heels clicked against the linoleum floor as she approached him. Her hands, adorned with a single elegant ring, trembled slightly as she clasped them together. Despite her obvious wealth, there was a vulnerability in her expression that made James pause before turning away. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice gentle but carrying a slight tremor. "I couldn't help but notice. That little girl. Is she yours?" James straightened his shoulders, falling back on his military training as he assessed the stranger. Years of service had taught him to read people quickly, but this woman was harder to figure out. Her designer outfit probably cost more than his monthly salary, yet her eyes held genuine concern rather than mere curiosity. "Yes, she's my daughter," he replied carefully, maintaining a respectful but guarded distance. "Lily." The woman drew in a sharp breath at the name. "Lily?" she repeated, almost to herself. "I'm Eleanor Hayes. I'm sorry if I'm intruding, but is she going to be okay?" James ran a hand through his disheveled hair, exhaustion and worry etched into every line of his face. "Asthma attack. Bad one. Her nebulizer wasn't working right, and I had to get her here fast." The words came out clipped, professional, the same way he used to report to his commanding officers when under stress. Eleanor nodded, her perfectly manicured fingers fidgeting with the strap of her designer purse. "How long has she had asthma?" The question made James's jaw tighten. Something about this woman's intense interest in Lily set off warning bells in his mind, even though her concern seemed genuine. "Since she was little. Look, I don't mean to be rude, but, of course, I'm sorry," Eleanor interrupted, taking a small step back. "I shouldn't be questioning you like this. It's just." She paused, seeming to struggle with her words. "She reminds me of someone I used to know." James studied her more carefully now. Eleanor Hayes carried herself with the poise of someone used to being in charge, but there was something almost fragile about her at this moment. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't quite hide the shadows under her eyes, or the way she kept glancing toward the treatment area where Lily lay. "Mr. Walker?" A doctor in blue scrubs pushed through the sliding doors, clipboard in hand. "Your daughter is responding well to the treatment." The tension in James's shoulders eased slightly as he turned toward the doctor. "She's stable?" "Yes, we've got her breathing under control now. The nebulizer treatment is working, and her oxygen levels are improving." The doctor glanced at his charts. "We'll want to keep her for observation for a few more hours, but she's going to be fine." James closed his eyes briefly, relief washing over him like a physical force. When he opened them again, he was surprised to find Eleanor still standing nearby, her hand reaching out to touch his arm gently. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice steady now, "please let me help with any expenses. I know we've just met, but I'd like to make sure Lily gets the best care possible." James stiffened, his pride warring with practicality. The hospital bills would be steep, and his insurance wouldn't cover everything. But accepting help from a stranger, especially one who seemed unnaturally interested in his daughter, went against every protective instinct he had. "That's very kind," he said carefully, "but, please," Eleanor interrupted softly. "I run a charitable foundation. This is what we do. No strings attached, I promise." She reached into her purse and withdrew a business card, holding it out to him. "You can verify everything about me, and the Hayes Foundation. I just want to help." James looked at the card, then back at Eleanor's face. In the harsh hospital lighting, he could see the sincerity in her eyes, mixed with something that looked almost like pain. His fingers closed around the card slowly, not accepting yet, but not refusing either. The doctor cleared his throat. "Mr. Walker, would you like to see your daughter now? She's asking for you." "Yes," James said immediately, his focus shifting back to what mattered most. He glanced at Eleanor one last time, the business card still in his hand. "Thank you for the offer, Miss Hayes. I'll think about it." Eleanor nodded, taking a small step back. "Of course. And please, call me Eleanor." She watched as James turned to follow the doctor, her hand still trembling slightly as she adjusted her purse strap. "I'm glad Lily's going to be okay." James sat in the dimly lit hospital room, his calloused hand gently holding Lily's smaller one. The steady beeping of monitors provided a rhythmic backdrop as his daughter slept peacefully, her chest finally rising and falling in an easy pattern. The plastic chair beneath him creaked as he shifted his weight, but he barely noticed the discomfort. All that mattered was that Lily could breathe again. A soft knock at the door made him look up. Eleanor Hayes stood in the doorway, her designer outfit somehow still looking pristine despite the late hour. She'd removed her blazer, and in just her silk blouse and tailored pants, she seemed less intimidating than before. "May I come in?" she whispered, careful not to disturb Lily. James nodded reluctantly, his military training automatically making him stand straighter in his chair. Eleanor pulled up another plastic chair, setting her expensive-looking purse on the floor beside her. "The doctors say she's going to be fine," Eleanor said softly, her eyes fixed on Lily's sleeping form. "But they mentioned she might need better medication, perhaps some preventive treatments." "We manage just fine," James replied, his voice carrying a hint of defensiveness. He'd learned long ago that pride was sometimes all a man had left. Eleanor turned to face him, her expression gentle but determined. "Mr. Walker." "James," he corrected, running his free hand through his short brown hair. "James," she continued, "I run the Hayes Foundation. We specifically work with children who need medical assistance. Helping families like yours is literally what I do for a living." James shook his head, his jaw tightening. "I appreciate the offer, ma'am, but I can take care of my own daughter." "I have no doubt about that," Eleanor said, her voice still quiet but carrying a note of passion. "But sometimes being a good parent means accepting help when it's offered. This isn't charity, James. It's community." He looked down at Lily's peaceful face, remembering how terrified he'd been when her breathing had become so labored. The truth was, her medical bills were already piling up, and his veterans' benefits only stretched so far. But accepting help from a stranger, a wealthy stranger at that, felt like admitting defeat. Why? He asked finally, meeting Eleanor's eyes. Why us? There must be thousands of kids who need help. Eleanor's fingers twisted together in her lap, and for a moment, her composed facade cracked slightly. Because I was here tonight, and I saw a father who would do anything for his daughter. Because I have the means to help, and what's the point of having resources if you don't use them to make a difference? James studied her face, looking for any sign of ulterior motives. But all he saw was sincerity and something else. Something that looked almost like pain. The foundation can provide better medical equipment, Eleanor continued, reaching down to pull a business card from her purse. We can arrange for a specialist to review her case, make sure she's getting the best possible treatment plan. All you have to do is say yes. James stared at the card she held out. The Hayes Foundation logo was elegant but understated, much like the woman herself. His fingers itched to take it, but years of self-reliance held him back. I don't know how to repay, he started, but Eleanor cut him off with a gentle shake of her head. That's not how this works. The foundation exists to help children like Lily. If you want to repay anything, do it by letting us make sure she gets the care she needs. A small movement from the bed drew both their attention. Lily stirred slightly, her long eyelashes fluttering against her cheeks. Her small hand tightened around James's fingers. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice slightly raspy. "I'm right here, sweetheart," James answered, leaning closer. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Lily said. Then her eyes drifted to Eleanor. A tiny smile curved her lips. "Hi, pretty lady." Eleanor's face softened completely, and she smiled back at Lily. "Hello, sweetheart. My name is Eleanor." "That's a princess name," Lily declared with the absolute certainty only a 7-year-old could muster. A quiet laugh escaped Eleanor. "Well, thank you. I think Lily is a princess name too." James watched the exchange, feeling something in his chest loosen slightly. The way Eleanor looked at his daughter, there was nothing calculating or cold about it, just genuine warmth and kindness. Lily's eyes were already starting to droop again, the medication making her drowsy. "I like her, Daddy," she murmured as she drifted back to sleep. James looked at his daughter's peaceful face, then at Eleanor's gentle smile, and finally at the business card still extended toward him. With a deep breath, he reached out and took it, feeling the weight of his pride, giving way to something that felt a lot like hope. Eleanor's smile widened, but she kept her victory modest. She simply nodded and stood up, smoothing her pants with practiced grace. "Get some rest, both of you. I'll have my office call tomorrow to set up a meeting with our medical coordinator." As she turned to leave, James found himself caught between gratitude and uncertainty. He watched Eleanor smile warmly at his sleeping daughter one more time before quietly slipping out of the room. The conflicting emotions in his chest seemed to mirror the shadows and light playing across the hospital room walls. Nothing was quite as clear as it had been just hours ago. Morning sunlight streamed through the hospital room's thin curtains, painting warm stripes across Lily's bed. She sat propped up against her pillows, carefully coloring in a picture book one of the nurses had given her. Her breathing was steady now, the frightening wheeze from last night replaced by the soft sounds of her humming. James stood by the window, filling out discharge papers on a clipboard. His pen scratched against the forms as he worked through the stack, pausing now and then to rub his tired eyes. He hadn't slept more than an hour or two in the plastic chair beside Lily's bed, but relief kept him going. Soon they'd be home, and this scary night would be behind them. "Look, Daddy." Lily held up her coloring book. "I made the unicorn rainbow, colored." James smiled, the exhaustion in his face softening. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. Just like you." The morning nurse had already removed Lily's 4 and monitoring equipment. She was back in her favorite pink pajamas with the cartoon rabbits, looking much more like herself than she had during the night's emergency. A soft knock at the door made them both look up. Eleanor Hayes stood in the doorway, her usual poise somehow different, more brittle. She wore the same elegant clothes from the night before, but there were shadows under her eyes that even careful makeup couldn't quite hide. "Good morning," she said quietly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I hoped to catch you before you left." "Hi, pretty lady." Lily called out cheerfully, waving her crayon. A trembling smile crossed Eleanor's face. "Hello, dear one." She turned to James, and something in her expression made him set down his clipboard. "Mr. Walker." "James, please. Could you wait just a moment before finalizing those discharge papers?" James frowned, his protective instincts flaring. "Is there a problem with the payment? Because I told you last night. I can't accept." No, Eleanor cut in quickly. "The hospital bills are taken care of, whether you'll let me help further or not. This island, this is something else entirely." She glanced at Lily, then back to James. "Could we step into the hall for a moment?" James hesitated, looking at his daughter. Lily had already returned to her coloring, apparently unconcerned with the adult conversation. "I'll be right back, Princess," he said. "Stay in bed, okay?" "Okay, Daddy." In the hallway, the morning bustle of the hospital surrounded them. Nurses checking charts, the squeak of cartwheels, phones ringing at the nurses' station. Eleanor led James a few steps away from Lily's door, but he made sure to keep it in view. "What's this about, Miss Hayes?" The formal name felt strange after the intense night they'd shared, but James needed the distance. Something about her demeanor set him on edge. Eleanor's perfectly manicured fingers twisted together. I haven't been entirely honest with you, James." She took a shaky breath. "When I saw Lily last night, I knew immediately who she was. She looked so much like Sarah." James felt like the floor tilted beneath his feet. "What did you just say?" "Sarah, your late wife." Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. "I knew her." James staggered back a step, his shoulder hitting the wall. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, too harsh. "That's impossible. Sarah never mentioned." "She wouldn't have," Eleanor said, and now there were tears gathering in her eyes. "We weren't. Our interaction wasn't a happy one, but I never forgot her face, or her name, or what I—" A passing nurse gave them a curious look, and Eleanor moved closer to the wall, lowering her voice further. "Your being here, Lily being here, it's not a coincidence, James. I come to this hospital every Tuesday night to check on the children's ward. I've been doing it for years ever since." James's mind raced, trying to piece together this impossible puzzle. "Since what? How did you know Sarah? Why are you here now?" Eleanor pressed her lips together, clearly struggling with what she needed to say next. Her usual confidence had crumbled completely, leaving something raw and vulnerable in its place. She looked past James to Lily's room, where they could see the little girl still absorbed in her coloring. "She's so beautiful," Eleanor whispered. "Just like her mother. When I saw her last night, it was like seeing Sarah again. And I knew I couldn't let you leave without telling you everything, without trying to make things right." James crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "Make what right?" But before Eleanor could answer, a doctor appeared with a tablet in hand. "Mr. Walker, I have Lily's final checkup scheduled before discharge. We should do it now, if you want to get home before the traffic gets bad." James held up a hand, not taking his eyes off Eleanor. Just give us a minute, please." The doctor nodded and moved away. In the heavy silence that followed, Eleanor seemed to gather what remained of her composure. She reached out, her hand trembling as she touched James's arm. "Please," she said, tears now falling freely. "Don't leave the hospital yet. There's something you need to know." The morning sunlight cast long shadows across the hospital room's pale green walls. James felt his heart pound against his ribs as he stared at Eleanor, her elegant composure cracking under the weight of whatever secret she carried. "What do you mean? There's something I need to know." His voice came out harder than intended, protective instincts flaring. He glanced at Lily, who was sitting up in bed, absorbed in drawing with the crayons a nurse had brought her. Eleanor's perfectly manicured hands twisted together. "Perhaps we should step outside for a moment?" James hesitated, looking at his daughter again. A young nurse stood nearby, checking Lily's vitals. "I'll keep an eye on her, Mr. Walker," she assured him with a kind smile. In the hallway, Eleanor led them to a small waiting area. The space was empty except for a few chairs and a sad-looking artificial plant. James remained standing, arms crossed, while Eleanor sank into one of the chairs, suddenly looking far less like a confident billionaire and more like someone carrying a heavy burden. "I knew Sarah," Eleanor said softly. "Your wife." The words hit James like a physical blow. He uncrossed his arms, gripping the back of a chair to steady himself. "What?" "It was about 8 years ago." Eleanor's voice wavered. "Before Lily was born, Sarah came to my foundation, seeking help. Eleanor's breath caught. She needed financial assistance for medical treatments." James shook his head, trying to process this information. "That's impossible. Sarah never mentioned knowing you." "Because I turned her away." The words seemed to cause Eleanor physical pain. Her shoulders hunched forward, and tears welled in her eyes. "I was different then, colder, more focused on numbers and policies than people. Sarah didn't meet our qualifying criteria, and She pressed her lips together, fighting for composure. "I dismissed her case without a second thought." James felt anger rise in his chest, hot and sharp. "You're telling me my wife came to you for help, and you turned her away?" "Yes." Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "It's the biggest regret of my life. Sarah was so graceful, even in rejection. She looked at me with such kindness and said, 'I understand. God bless you anyway.'" Eleanor wiped at her eyes. "Those words haunted me. They changed me." James paced the small area, running his hands through his hair. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because that's not the end of the story." Eleanor straightened in her chair. 3 months later, Sarah came back. Not to ask for help again. She'd found another way by then. She came to forgive me. James stopped pacing. That sounded exactly like Sarah. Her capacity for forgiveness had always amazed him. "She told me she'd been praying for me," Eleanor continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Can you imagine? After what I'd done, she was praying for me. We talked for hours that day. She told me about you, about her pregnancy, about her dreams for her child." Eleanor's gaze drifted to Lily's room. "She made me promise something." James felt a chill run down his spine. "What promise?" "She said she had a feeling, call it mother's intuition, that she might not always be there for her baby." Eleanor's hands trembled as she spoke. "She made me swear that if anything ever happened to her, I would look after her child. She said God had put it on her heart that this was important." James staggered back, falling into a chair. Sarah had always had those moments of almost supernatural intuition. But this? Why didn't she ever tell me? "She didn't want to worry you. She said you were already carrying so much, with your military service and her health concerns." Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "I've spent years trying to find you both. After I heard about Sarah's passing, I searched everywhere, but you'd moved, changed numbers. Then tonight, seeing Lily." She gestured helplessly. "It was like Sarah herself had guided me here." James pressed his palms against his eyes, memories of Sarah washing over him, her gentle smile, her unwavering faith, her ability to see the best in everyone. Even now, years after her death, she was still taking care of them in ways he never knew. "If anything happens to me, promise me you'll look after my child." Eleanor repeated Sarah's words softly. Those were her exact words. "I swore to her, and I swore to God, that if I ever got a second chance, I wouldn't fail her again." She reached out tentatively, then pulled back. "I know this is overwhelming, and you have every right to be angry about my past actions. But please, James, let me keep my promise to Sarah." James looked through the window at Lily, still happily drawing, unaware that her mother's love was still working miracles even now. His mind spun with questions, with anger, with disbelief, but underneath it all, he heard Sarah's voice, remembered her unshakable faith that God worked in mysterious ways. "I need time," he managed to say, his voice rough with emotion. "This island, it's too much to process right now." Eleanor nodded, rising from her chair. "I understand. Take all the time you need." She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, placing it on the small table between them. "When you're ready to talk, if you're ever ready, I'll be here." The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as James sat in the padded hospital chair, turning Eleanor Hayes's cream-colored business card over and over in his calloused hands. The embossed letters caught the light, Eleanor Hayes, CEO, Hayes Foundation. Below that was a phone number, printed in elegant silver text. Lily slept peacefully now, her chest rising and falling in an easy rhythm that James couldn't take for granted. Her small hand clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit, the one that had been through every hospital visit with them. The rabbit's fur was matted and worn, just like James felt inside. He rubbed his tired eyes, trying to make sense of everything Eleanor had told him. Sarah had known her? Had asked her for help? The thought of his late wife reaching out to someone and being turned away made his jaw clench. But the pain in Eleanor's eyes when she'd confessed seemed genuine. The way she'd trembled while telling him about her promise to Sarah. "What would you want me to do?" he whispered to the quiet room, thinking of Sarah. They'd never discussed what would happen if she died. They were young, in love, planning forever, not preparing for goodbye. The steady beeping of Lily's heart monitor filled the silence. James studied his daughter's face, so much like her mother's. The same delicate nose, the same golden brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. 7 years old, and already she'd been through more than any child should. A nurse came in to check Lily's vitals, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum floor. "She's doing much better," the nurse whispered with a kind smile. "The new medication Miss Hayes arranged for has really helped." James nodded, his throat tight. That was true. Within hours of Eleanor's intervention, Lily had been moved to a private room and seen by a respiratory specialist. The doctor had prescribed a different combination of medications that seemed to be working better than anything they'd tried before. But accepting help meant owing something. James had learned that lesson the hard way after leaving the army. "Nothing comes free," his father used to say. The memory of those words made him grip the business card tighter. Lily stirred in her sleep, making a small sound. James immediately leaned forward, but she just shifted position and continued sleeping. He relaxed back into his chair, feeling the ache in his lower back from sitting so long. The window showed the city lights twinkling against the dark sky. Somewhere out there, Eleanor Hayes was probably in her penthouse or mansion, or wherever billionaires lived. Was she thinking about them? About the promise she'd made to Sarah? James pulled out his phone and typed Eleanor's name into the search bar. Articles popped up immediately, photos of her at charity galas, headlines about her foundation's work with children's hospitals. She looked polished and professional in every image. But he remembered how her perfect composure had cracked when she'd talked about Sarah. "Daddy?" Lily's sleepy voice pulled his attention away from the phone. "Hey, sweetheart." He scooted his chair closer. "How are you feeling?" "Better." She hugged her rabbit closer. "My chest doesn't hurt anymore." "That's good." He smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "The new medicine is helping." Lily's eyes fell on the business card in his other hand. "Is that from Miss Eleanor?" "Yes, it Island. She's nice." Lily smiled, revealing the gap where she'd recently lost a tooth. "She reminds me of the pictures of Mommy." James's heart squeezed. "What do you mean?" "The way she looks at me. Like she really sees me, you know." Lily yawned. "And she smells like flowers, just like in Mommy's garden in the pictures." James swallowed hard. Sarah had loved her flower garden, spending hours tending to the roses and lilies she'd planted. After she died, he couldn't bear to keep it up. The flowers had withered away, just like so many of their dreams. "Miss Eleanor said she'd show me how to play piano," Lily continued, her eyes brightening despite her tiredness. "I told her I always wanted to learn, and she said she has a beautiful piano at her house." "Do you think she meant it?" James looked at his daughter's hopeful face. Piano lessons had been one of many things he couldn't afford, along with the better medications, the specialists, the private room they now sat in. His pride warred with his desire to give Lily everything possible. "She seemed very sincere," he said carefully. "And she said she knew Mommy." Lily picked at her blanket. "Did she really?" "It seems she did, yes." "Then she can tell me stories about her?" Lily's voice lifted with excitement. "I only know the ones you tell me, Daddy. I want to know more." James felt tears prick at his eyes. Of course Lily wanted to know more about her mother, the mother she'd lost when she was too young to form her own memories. He could only share so much, and sometimes the memories were too painful to voice. "Daddy?" Lily reached for his hand. "Can we see Miss Eleanor again?" He looked at their joined hands, his large and work-roughened, hers small and trusting. Everything in him wanted to protect her, to keep their world small and safe. But hadn't he always told Lily that being brave meant doing things that scared you sometimes? "Please?" Lily added softly. "She makes me feel special. Like Mommy can see us." James closed his eyes briefly, remembering Sarah's laugh, her fierce love for their daughter, her belief that good things could come from difficult times. Maybe this was one of those times. "Daddy, can we see Miss Eleanor again?" Lily squeezed his hand, her eyes pleading. James looked at the business card one more time, then tucked it into his shirt pocket, right over his heart. "Yes," he said quietly. "We can meet her outside the hospital tomorrow." The sleek black SUV purred along the tree-lined driveway, its tires crunching softly on the gravel. James sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his worn jeans and simple button-down shirt a stark contrast to the vehicle's leather interior. In the back seat, Lily pressed her face against the window, her eyes wide with wonder. "Look, Daddy," she gasped, pointing at the perfectly manicured gardens that stretched out on either side. "The flowers look like a rainbow." Eleanor smiled as she steered the car around a curved fountain. "Those are my prize-winning rose gardens. Would you like to see them up close later, Lily?" James shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The sheer size of Eleanor's estate made his modest two-bedroom apartment feel even smaller. Stone walls rose before them, and the mansion, there was no other word for it, seemed to touch the clouds. "It's like a castle," Lily whispered in awe. Eleanor parked in front of wide stone steps that led to massive wooden doors. A uniformed man appeared immediately to open their doors. James quickly got out, rushing to help Lily himself before anyone else could. "Welcome to Hayes Manor," Eleanor said softly, noting James's tension. She led them up the steps, her heels clicking against the stone. "I know it's a bit overwhelming at first." "A bit?" James muttered under his breath. But Lily's excitement was infectious as she skipped beside him. The entrance hall took James's breath away, despite himself. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, dancing across marble floors and illuminating crystal chandeliers. His military boots echoed in the vast space, making him even more conscious of how out of place he felt. "The main living areas are this way," Eleanor gestured, leading them through an archway. "But first, I have something special to show Lily." They followed her down a hallway, lined with artwork that probably cost more than James would make in 10 lifetimes. Eleanor stopped at a set of double doors, painted in cheerful yellow. "Close your eyes, Lily," Eleanor said with a warm smile. Lily giggled and covered her eyes with her small hands. Eleanor pushed open the doors and guided them inside. "Okay, you can look now." Lily's gasp of delight filled the room. James had to blink twice to make sure he wasn't imagining things. The room was every child's dream come true. One wall was lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with colorful books. Another held a puppet theater and dress-up station, complete with princess dresses and superhero costumes. There were art supplies, building blocks, and in the corner, a magnificent dollhouse taller than Lily herself. "Island, is this all for me?" Lily asked in a whisper. Eleanor knelt down beside her. "This is my special playroom. I've been collecting these toys for years, hoping someday a little girl might enjoy them." James's throat tightened. The longing in Eleanor's voice was unmistakable. He watched as Lily took tentative steps toward a rocking horse, her fingers trailing along its wooden mane. "May I?" she asked, looking between Eleanor and her father. James nodded, forcing a smile. "Go ahead, sweetheart." As Lily explored the room in wonder, Eleanor turned to James. "I know this is all very different from what you're used to," she said quietly. "But please understand, I want to share what I have. Not to show off, but because—" She paused, collecting herself. "Because I owe it to Sarah and to Lily." James's jaw clenched. The mention of Sarah's name still felt like a punch to the gut. "We don't need charity," he said, but his voice lacked conviction as he watched Lily discover a shelf of stuffed animals. "It's not charity, James. It's—" Eleanor searched for the right words. It's making amends. And maybe, if you'll let me, it's about building something new." Before James could respond, a uniformed woman appeared at the door. "Dinner is served, Miss Hayes." They made their way to a dining room that could have seated 20, but Eleanor had arranged for them to eat at a cozier round table by a window overlooking the gardens. Lily's eyes grew round at the sight of the elaborate place settings. "These forks are so fancy," she whispered loudly to James, making Eleanor laugh. As they ate, James couldn't help but notice how natural Eleanor was with Lily, asking about her favorite subjects in school and listening intently to stories about her class hamster. The food was simple but delicious. Eleanor had thoughtfully ordered kid-friendly dishes. "Lily," Eleanor said as they finished their main course, "I couldn't help but notice you were looking at the piano in the living room earlier." Lily's face lit up. "It's so beautiful. Like the one in my music class at school." "Do you like music, sweetheart?" "Oh yes. Mrs. Thompson lets me play sometimes during recess. She says I have a good ear." Eleanor smiled, glancing at James before continuing. "Well, I happen to know an excellent piano teacher. Would you like to take lessons?" The joy that spread across Lily's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. She turned to James, hope shining in her eyes. "Could I, Daddy? Please?" James felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling. Piano lessons had been so far out of reach on his salary, just one more thing he couldn't give his daughter. But here was Eleanor, offering it so easily, along with so much more. He started, looking at Lily's pleading face. "The teacher could come here," Eleanor added gently. "Twice a week, after school. And of course, Lily could practice on the piano here any time." Lily clasped her hands together, practically bouncing in her seat. "Oh, please, Daddy, I promise I'll practice every day." James looked at his daughter's shining face, then at Eleanor's hopeful expression. The weight of his pride pressed against his chest, but Lily's joy was stronger. He thought of all the times he'd had to say no to her dreams, all the opportunities he couldn't provide. "All right," he said softly, and Lily's squeal of delight echoed through the grand room. James knelt beside Lily in her bedroom, helping her button up her new dark blue dress. His calloused fingers fumbled with the tiny pearl buttons, but he took his time, wanting everything to be perfect for her first piano lesson. Sunlight streamed through the bay window of the guest room Eleanor had prepared for them, making the cream-colored walls glow warmly. "Hold still, sweetheart," James said as Lily bounced on her toes. "I don't want to miss any buttons." "I can't help it, Daddy. I'm so excited." Lily's eyes sparkled with joy. Her breathing was steady today, much better than it had been in the hospital just days ago. A soft knock at the door made them both look up. Eleanor stood in the doorway, elegant in a simple white blouse and navy slacks. She watched them with such tenderness that James felt his chest tighten. The way she looked at Lily reminded him so much of Sarah. "May I help?" Eleanor asked softly, stepping into the room. James nodded, moving aside as Eleanor knelt down beside them. Her hands moved with practiced grace, finishing the remaining buttons in seconds. "There we go," Eleanor said, smoothing down Lily's collar. "You look beautiful, sweetheart, just like a real pianist." Lily twirled, her dress floating around her. "Really? Do I look like the ladies in the pictures downstairs?" "Even better," Eleanor assured her, reaching for a small velvet box on the dresser. "I have something special for your first lesson." James watched as Eleanor opened the box, revealing a delicate silver music note pendant on a thin chain. His first instinct was to protest. It looked expensive. But the pure delight on Lily's face stopped him. "This was my grandmother's," Eleanor explained, fastening it around Lily's neck. "She taught piano for 40 years. She always said music was magic for the soul. It's so pretty." Lily touched the pendant carefully. "Thank you, Miss Eleanor." Eleanor's eyes glistened as she smiled. "You're very welcome, dear." James cleared his throat, fighting back his own emotion. "We should head downstairs. Don't want to be late for Miss Chen." They made their way to the music room, where a gleaming black grand piano dominated the space. Lily's new teacher, a petite woman with kind eyes, waited by the piano bench. "Hello, Lily," Miss Chen greeted warmly. "Are you ready to begin your musical journey?" Lily nodded eagerly, but then hesitated, looking back at James and Eleanor. James gave her an encouraging smile. "We'll be right here in the sitting room," he assured her, gesturing to the adjacent space where comfortable armchairs faced tall windows overlooking the garden. As Miss Chen began the lesson, starting with proper posture and hand position, James and Eleanor settled into the chairs. The first tentative notes of scales floated through the air, occasionally interrupted by Lily's giggles when she made a mistake. "She has natural rhythm," Eleanor observed quietly. "Sarah used to play, you know." James turned to her, surprised. "She did?" Eleanor nodded, her expression distant. "The church piano, every Sunday." She paused, twisting her hands in her lap. "That's how we met, actually. I was funding a youth music program." She trailed off, and James could see the weight of memory in her eyes. He wanted to ask more about Sarah, about their connection, but something in Eleanor's face told him she wasn't ready to share that story yet. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to Lily's lesson. The afternoon sun painted patterns on the hardwood floor as time passed. James watched his daughter's face scrunch in concentration as she carefully picked out, "Mary had a little lamb, one note at a time." When the lesson ended, Lily practically bounced over to them. "Did you hear me? Did you hear me play?" "We sure did, Princess," James said, pulling her into a hug. "You did great." "Wonderful job, Lily," Eleanor added. "How about we celebrate with some ice cream in the garden?" After ice cream and an early dinner, Lily fell asleep on one of the plush sofas in the library, worn out from her exciting day. James carefully draped a soft throw blanket over her. Eleanor stood by the fireplace, watching them. The setting sun cast long shadows through the library windows, giving the room a dreamlike quality. James straightened up and turned to her. "Thank you," he said quietly, meaning far more than just the piano lesson. Eleanor met his eyes, and he saw vulnerability there that her usual composed demeanor kept hidden. "James, I need you to understand something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not just trying to help. I'm trying to make things right, to atone." The word hung heavy in the air between them. James looked at his sleeping daughter, at the silver pendant still gleaming at her throat, and felt the weight of all the things still unsaid about Sarah, about the past, about promises broken and kept. "I know," he replied simply, because he did. He could see it in every gentle gesture, every careful kindness. Eleanor Hayes wasn't just being charitable. She was seeking redemption. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Eleanor Hayes' foundation office, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. James Walker shifted in his leather chair, feeling out of place in his worn jeans and work boots among the elegant furnishings. Eleanor stood by a wall covered with framed photographs, each showing smiling children and families. Her fingers traced the edge of one particular frame. "This was our first project," she said softly. "A medical clinic in a neighborhood where families couldn't afford basic health care." James leaned forward, studying the image. Kids played on brand new playground equipment while parents chatted with medical staff on a sunny porch. "How many clinics have you built?" 12 so far." Eleanor turned to face him, her usual confident posture softening slightly. "But it never feels like enough." She walked to her desk and sank into her chair, absently straightening a stack of papers. "You know, I wasn't always." She gestured vaguely at the luxurious office. "This." James raised an eyebrow, waiting. "We lived in a trailer park when I was young," Eleanor continued, her voice growing quieter. "My mom worked 3 jobs. Some nights, dinner was just saltine crackers with peanut butter." She gave a small, sad laugh. "I swore I'd never be hungry again." James recognized the look in her eyes. He'd seen it in fellow veterans who carried heavy memories. "What changed?" "I got lucky with some tech investments in my 20s. Then more investments. Soon I had more money than I knew what to do with." Eleanor's fingers twisted a pen on her desk. "But somewhere along the way, I hardened. Started seeing people as problems to solve, rather than human beings who needed compassion." She stood abruptly and walked to a window, arms crossed tightly. "That's what happened with Sarah, Lily's mother. She came to me for help, and I saw her as just another person wanting a handout. I forgot what it felt like to be desperate. James felt his jaw tighten at the mention of his late wife, but something in Eleanor's posture, the way her shoulders curved inward, made him hold back his anger. I've spent years trying to make up for it, Eleanor continued. Building clinics, funding scholarships, creating food programs. But none of it brought back what I lost that day. My humanity. She turned back to James, and he was startled to see tears in her eyes. When I saw Lily in that hospital room, it was like God was giving me a second chance, not just to keep my promise to Sarah, but to remember who I used to be before money changed me. James stood and walked to the photo wall, taking in the hundreds of faces. Each one represented a life touched by Eleanor's work. These aren't just tax write-offs to you, are they? No, Eleanor whispered. They're my redemption. She joined him at the wall, pointing to various photos. That family there, their son needed a heart transplant. This woman was living in her car with 3 kids until we helped her find housing. This boy, her voice caught. He reminded me so much of my little brother who didn't survive childhood cancer. James watched her face as she shared each story. The polished billionaire facade had cracked, revealing something raw and real underneath. Here was someone who understood loss, who knew what it meant to fight your way up from nothing. I threw myself into making money because I thought it would fix everything, Eleanor admitted. But all it did was teach me how to build walls around my heart. It took losing Sarah's trust to make me see what I'd become. She met his gaze directly, and James saw something he hadn't noticed before, a deep well of humility behind her usual confidence. I can't change what happened with Sarah, but I can try to be the person she believed I could be, the person who deserves to help you and Lily. James thought about his daughter, how her face lit up during piano lessons, how she'd started humming again after months of silence following her mother's death. He thought about his own pride, how it had nearly made him turn down help that could give Lily a better life. Looking at Eleanor now, he didn't see the intimidating billionaire philanthropist anymore. He saw someone who had lost her way and fought to find it again. Someone who understood the weight of mistakes and the costly path to redemption. For the first time since meeting Eleanor, James felt his guard lowering. Maybe, just maybe, he could trust this woman who had learned humility the hard way, the same way he had learned it through loss and struggle. Eleanor turned away from the photo wall, wiping quickly at her eyes. In that simple gesture, James saw past her designer clothes and carefully maintained image. He saw someone real. Someone who might actually understand his fears for Lily's future. The morning sunlight caught the tears still clinging to Eleanor's lashes, and in that moment of vulnerability, James allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to trust her, not as a wealthy benefactor, but as someone who truly cared about his daughter's well-being. The autumn breeze rustled through the garden as Eleanor's silver Mercedes pulled into the driveway of her mansion. James checked his watch. 3 o'clock, right on time for Lily's piano lesson. These weekly routines had become familiar over the past month, and he found himself looking forward to them more than he cared to admit. "Did you see that butterfly?" Lily pressed her face against the car window, her breath fogging up the glass. Her health had improved dramatically since Eleanor had arranged for a specialist, and her eyes sparkled with an energy James hadn't seen in years. Eleanor smiled in the rearview mirror. "I have a surprise waiting inside for both of you." James raised an eyebrow. "Eleanor, we talked about the gifts." "Oh, this one's different," she said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "I promise." They walked through the grand entrance hall, Lily skipping ahead. James noticed Eleanor was practically bouncing with excitement herself, though she tried to hide it behind her usual grace. "Close your eyes, Lily," Eleanor instructed, leading them toward the sunroom. Lily squeezed her eyes shut tight, grabbing both their hands. James could feel her trembling with anticipation. "Okay, open them." A tiny golden retriever puppy sat in the middle of the room, wearing a red bow around its neck. It wagged its tail furiously at the sight of them. "A puppy!" Lily's shriek of joy echoed off the marble floors. She dropped to her knees, and the puppy bounded over, covering her face with eager kisses. James started to protest. "Eleanor, before you say no." Eleanor held up her hand. "Hear me out. The doctor said having a pet can help with anxiety, which triggers her asthma. Plus, studies show caring for animals helps children develop responsibility and— You researched this, James said softly, watching his daughter giggle as the puppy crawled into her lap. Eleanor nodded. I always do my homework, James. What should I name him? Lily looked up at them, her face glowing. It's a girl, actually, Eleanor said, kneeling down to scratch behind the puppy's ears. And she's all yours to name. Buttercup? Lily declared without hesitation. Because she's yellow like butter. James couldn't help but laugh. The puppy, Buttercup, yipped in apparent approval. The afternoon unfolded in a blur of joy. Lily's piano lesson was frequently interrupted by Buttercup's playful barking, but her teacher took it in stride. They spent hours in the garden afterward, teaching the puppy basic commands and watching her chase butterflies through Eleanor's prized roses. As the sun began to set, Eleanor's chef served dinner on the terrace, grilled chicken for the humans and special puppy food for Buttercup. James noticed how Eleanor had seamlessly integrated their presence into her world, from the booster seat for Lily to the child-friendly menu options. Can Buttercup sleep in my room? Lily asked through a yawn, her eyes heavy with contentment. She has a special bed in the mudroom for tonight, Eleanor explained. Once she's trained, we'll see about sleepovers. James carried his drowsy daughter upstairs to her room. She spent so many nights here now that Eleanor had decorated it just for her, with twinkling fairy lights and cloud-painted walls. Buttercup tried to follow, but Eleanor gently scooped her up. After tucking Lily in, James found Eleanor on the patio. She had opened a bottle of wine and set out 2 glasses, the soft lighting from the garden creating a warm glow around her. You're spoiling us, he said, accepting the glass she offered. I prefer to think of it as investing in happiness. Eleanor sat on the cushioned patio sofa, patting the space beside her. Besides, watching Lily with that puppy today. I haven't felt this happy in years. James settled next to her, close enough to smell her subtle perfume. You've done so much for us, Eleanor. Sometimes I wonder what we've done to deserve it. You've given me something priceless, she said quietly. A chance to make things right. To be part of a— She hesitated, swirling the wine in her glass. To be part of something real. The cricket songs filled the comfortable silence between them. James noticed how the evening light softened Eleanor's features, making her look younger, more vulnerable. Despite her wealth and power, there was a loneliness about her that called to his own. Eleanor reached for the wine bottle to refill their glasses, and her hand brushed against his. Neither of them pulled away immediately. The touch lingered, sending a current of awareness through them both. The silence hummed with words. They hadn't yet found the courage to speak. They sat there, hands touching, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The moment felt delicate, like a soap bubble floating in the air, beautiful and fragile and full of possibility. The grand ballroom of the city's finest hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. James tugged at his collar, feeling the age of his navy suit, the only one he owned from his military days. He stood near a towering flower arrangement, watching the crowd of wealthy donors mingle in their designer clothes. Lily twirled beside him in her new pink dress, her eyes wide with wonder. "Daddy, look at all the pretty lights." She pointed up at the twinkling crystals above them. "I see them, sweetheart." James smiled, grateful that his daughter felt none of his discomfort. She had been so excited when Eleanor presented her with the dress earlier that day, complete with matching shoes that sparkled almost as much as the chandeliers. "James?" Eleanor's voice carried across the room. She gracefully made her way through the crowd, turning heads in her elegant red gown. When she reached them, her face lit up with genuine joy. "You both look wonderful." James shuffled his feet. "We clean up okay, I guess." He tried to sound casual, but his heart quickened at the sight of her. "More than okay." Eleanor knelt to Lily's level, her dress pooling around her. "You look just like a princess, Lily." Lily beamed. "You look like one too. Can we dance later?" "Of course we can, sweet girl." Eleanor stood, touching James's arm lightly. "And I expect at least one dance from your father too." Before James could respond, a group of well-dressed guests approached Eleanor. "Mrs. Hayes, the Foundation's work this year has been remarkable." James watched as Eleanor smoothly engaged with them, noting how she kept one hand on Lily's shoulder, including the child in the conversation. "Actually, I'd like you to meet two very special people. This is James Walker and his daughter Lily. They've taught me more about courage and grace than any foundation ever could." The wealthy couples smiled politely, but James caught the subtle looks they exchanged. He knew what they were thinking. What was a man in a worn suit doing at their fancy party? "Daddy?" Lily tugged at his sleeve. "I'm hungry. The buffet is this way," Eleanor said quickly, excusing them from the group. She led them to a table laden with fancy foods James couldn't name. "I made sure they included chicken nuggets and mac and cheese," she whispered to him with a wink. Lily's face brightened at the familiar foods. As she filled her plate, Eleanor turned to James. "I'm sorry about that back there. Some of these people—" "It's okay," James cut her off gently. "I know I don't exactly fit in here. That's not true." Eleanor's voice was firm. "You belong exactly where you are. Those people may have money, but you have something far more valuable. A heart of gold and the most wonderful daughter in the world." James felt warmth spread through his chest. He watched as Eleanor helped Lily cut her chicken, noting how natural they looked together. The past few weeks had changed everything. His daughter was healthier, happier, and for the first time since losing Sarah, he felt like they weren't alone anymore. After dinner, the orchestra struck up a waltz. Eleanor was immediately surrounded by guests wanting to discuss donations, but her eyes kept finding James across the room. He stood with Lily, who was swaying to the music. Finally, Eleanor made her way back to them. "May I have this dance?" she asked Lily, who nodded enthusiastically. James watched as Eleanor guided his daughter around the dance floor, both of them laughing as Lily stepped on Eleanor's toes. When the song ended, Eleanor returned to James, slightly out of breath. "Your turn, soldier." "I don't know." James hesitated. "Please?" Eleanor held out her hand. "For me?" Lily pushed him forward. "Go dance, Daddy." James took Eleanor's hand, letting her lead him onto the dance floor. He placed his other hand carefully on her waist, remembering the basic steps from his wedding day. "See, you're a natural," Eleanor murmured as they moved to the music. Her perfume was subtle and sweet, making his head spin slightly. Other couples gave them space, but James barely noticed. Eleanor felt right in his arms, as if they'd been dancing together for years. Her red dress swirled around them as they turned, and James caught glimpses of Lily watching them with a huge smile from her seat. "Thank you for coming tonight," Eleanor said softly. "I know this isn't your usual scene. It's worth it to see Lily so happy." James paused. "And to see you." Eleanor's eyes shimmered in the chandelier light. She moved closer, resting her head briefly against his shoulder. "I never thought I could feel this alive again." James smiled, thinking he might feel the same. The music continued to play, but for him, there was only Eleanor, the warmth of her hand in his, and the promise of something beautiful beginning to bloom. The morning sun filtered through James's kitchen window, casting warm light across the wooden table where he sat with his coffee and newspaper. Lily hummed in the background, practicing her piano scales on the small keyboard Eleanor had given her. The peaceful domesticity of the moment made his heart full, until his eyes landed on the headline. "Billionaire's dark past. Did Eleanor Hayes abandon a desperate mother?" James's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. His hands trembled as he spread the newspaper flat, scanning the article with growing horror. "Former employee reveals shocking truth about philanthropist Eleanor Hayes," the article began. 10 years ago, Sarah Walker, a pregnant woman in desperate circumstances, sought help from Hayes Enterprises. Sources confirm Miss Hayes refused to meet with her, despite the woman's obvious distress. The room seemed to tilt. James gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. The article continued, describing how Sarah had waited for hours in the lobby, begging to speak with Eleanor. How she'd been escorted out by security, crying and clutching her stomach, pregnant with Lily. "Daddy?" Lily's voice barely registered. "Are you okay? You look funny." James forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Keep practicing." But he wasn't fine. His mind raced back through every moment with Eleanor. her gentle touches, her generous gifts, her seemingly genuine care for Lily. Had it all been guilt? Just an attempt to clean her conscience? The article included a grainy security camera photo. Even in the poor quality, James recognized Sarah's long dark hair, her slight frame. She stood at a reception desk, clearly distressed. The timestamp matched exactly when Sarah had told him she'd lost her job during her pregnancy. She'd never told him where she'd gone seeking help that day. His phone buzzed. Eleanor's name lit up the screen. He silenced it. "Lily?" he called out, his voice rougher than intended. "Get your coat, honey. We're going to visit Aunt Marie today." "But what about my lesson with Miss Eleanor?" The innocent question twisted in his gut. "Not today, sweetheart." After dropping Lily at his sister's house, James drove to Eleanor's office building downtown. The same building where Sarah had stood, desperate and alone, all those years ago. The polished glass and steel structure that had once impressed him now felt cold and forbidding. The receptionist recognized him immediately. "Mr. Walker, Miss Hayes is in a meeting, but I'm sure she'll—" "Tell her I'm here," James cut in, his voice flat. Minutes later, Eleanor hurried into the lobby. Her face brightened at the sight of him, then fell as she registered his expression. "James, what's wrong?" He held up the newspaper. Eleanor's face drained of color. "My office," she whispered. The ride up in the elevator was silent. James stared straight ahead, the newspaper crumpled in his fist. Eleanor kept glancing at him, her hands clasped tightly together. Her corner office, with its panoramic views of the city, had once left him in awe. Now it felt like a monument to everything that separated them. Wealth, power, privilege, the things that had made Eleanor too important to help a pregnant woman in need. "James, please let me explain," Eleanor began as soon as the door closed. "Explain what?" His voice came out harder than he'd ever spoken to her. "How you had Sarah thrown out of this building. How you couldn't spare 5 minutes for my wife when she was carrying our child. I didn't know, you didn't want to know." James paced the office, unable to stand still. "You told me. You turned her away once. But you didn't tell me everything. You didn't tell me how she begged, how she waited for hours." Eleanor sank into her chair, her shoulders slumping. "You're right. I should have told you everything. You let security escort her out." The image made him sick. She was pregnant, scared, alone. "I was different then," Eleanor whispered. "I had just taken over the company. I was trying so hard to prove I was tough enough that I wouldn't be pushed around. I built walls around myself. And those walls kept out the people who needed you most." James stopped at the window, staring out at the city below. Somewhere out there was the cemetery where Sarah rested. "She never told me it was you. Even after everything, she protected you." That was Sarah. Eleanor's voice cracked. "She had every right to be bitter, to expose what I'd done. Instead, she came back years later, not to condemn me, but to ask me to watch over Lily if anything happened to her." James turned, his eyes burning. "How could you look me in the eye all these weeks? Play house with my daughter? Was this all just about easing your guilty conscience?" "No." Eleanor stood, reaching for him. "James, everything between us has been real. My feelings for you, my love for Lily." "Love?" James stepped back. "You let my wife down when she needed you most. How can I trust you now?" Eleanor's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. But James couldn't bear to see her pain, not when all he could think about was Sarah's. He walked out, leaving Eleanor shattered behind him. The sound of her quiet sobs followed him down the hallway, but he didn't look back. His heart felt like it was being torn in two, between the future he'd started to imagine with Eleanor and the past she'd helped destroy. The elevator doors closed on Eleanor's world of wealth and privilege, taking him back down to where he belonged. Back to the simple life where at least he knew who he could trust. In his truck, James sat gripping the steering wheel, Sarah's face floating in his memory. Her gentle smile, her forgiving heart. Even at the end, she'd believed in second chances. But right now, James couldn't find that same grace within himself. James's old truck rumbled to a stop in front of their apartment building. The familiar sight of the weathered brick structure felt both comforting and confining after the weeks they'd spent visiting Eleanor's grand estate. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Lily, who sat quietly in her booster seat, hugging the stuffed bunny Eleanor had given her. "Come on, sweetheart," James said softly, helping her out of the truck. "Let's get inside." Lily's small hand slipped into his as they climbed the stairs to their third-floor apartment. The elevator was broken again, but James barely noticed the climb anymore. His mind was too full of the newspaper article's words, of Eleanor's tear-filled eyes as he'd stormed out of her office. Inside their apartment, Lily went straight to her piano keyboard, but her fingers just hovered over the keys. She turned to James with those big brown eyes that always reminded him of Sarah. "Daddy, why didn't we go to Miss Eleanor's house today? She promised to help me with the new song." James's throat tightened. He sat heavily on their worn couch, patting the space beside him. "Come here, sweetie." Lily crawled up next to him, still clutching her bunny. "Is Miss Eleanor sick?" "No, she's not sick." James ran a hand through his hair, searching for words that wouldn't hurt his daughter. Sometimes grown-ups need to take a break from each other, to think about things. "But why?" Lily's lower lip trembled. "She makes you smile again, like in the pictures with Mommy." The innocent observation hit James like a physical blow. He pulled Lily closer, breathing in the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. "It's complicated, honey, Miss Eleanor. She knew Mommy a long time ago, before you were born." Lily perked up. "She did? Did they have tea parties like we do?" James's heart clenched. "No, baby. They didn't get to know each other very well. Actually, that's part of why Daddy needs some time to think." "Is it because of the mean things in the newspaper?" Lily asked suddenly. James stiffened. "How do you know about that?" "I saw you reading it this morning. You looked sad, like when you look at Mommy's pictures." Sometimes, James forgot how observant his daughter was. He hugged her closer. "Yes, the newspaper said some things that made Daddy upset. But you don't need to worry about that." "Miss Eleanor told me everyone makes mistakes," Lily said softly. "She said that's why God gives us second chances." James blinked hard against the sudden moisture in his eyes. "Out of the mouths of babes, as Sarah used to say." "Why don't you go practice your piano for a little while?" he suggested gently. "I'll make us some mac and cheese for dinner." Lily nodded and slid off the couch, but paused. "Daddy, can we pray for Miss Eleanor tonight? Mommy always said we should pray for people when we miss them." James swallowed the lump in his throat. "Of course we can, sweetheart." He watched Lily settle at her keyboard, her small fingers picking out the melody Eleanor had taught her. The simple tune filled their modest apartment, making it feel emptier somehow. In the kitchen, James mechanically went through the motions of preparing dinner. The familiar routine couldn't distract him from the turmoil in his mind. He pulled a pot from the cabinet, remembering how Eleanor had insisted on buying them new cookware when she saw their mismatched collection. The memory sparked others. Eleanor teaching Lily to make cookies. Eleanor sitting through endless tea parties. Eleanor's face lighting up when Lily called her second mom. Had it all been an act? Just wealthy guilt trying to make amends? But then he remembered Eleanor's trembling hands that first night in the hospital, the way she looked at Lily like she was seeing a ghost. The genuine tears when she confessed her past mistake with Sarah. After dinner and Lily's bedtime routine, James sat alone at the kitchen table. Sarah's photo smiled at him from its place of honor on the windowsill. He picked it up, tracing her familiar features with his finger. "What do I do?" he whispered into the night. The grand ballroom of the Hayes Foundation sparkled with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors, but the usual warmth was missing. Eleanor Hayes stood alone near the podium, her fingers wrapped tightly around a glass of water. The whispers around her felt like tiny daggers. "Can you believe she turned away a dying woman?" A woman in pearls murmured behind her hand. "And now she pretends to care about children's health care," another responded with a sniff. Eleanor took a small sip of water, willing her hand not to shake. Her black evening gown, usually a source of confidence, felt like armor against the judging eyes. The crowd of donors, who once hung on her every word, now clustered in small groups, their backs turned to her. Marcus, her event coordinator, approached with an apologetic look. "Mrs. Hayes, we're down 30% in pledges compared to last year. Should we postpone your speech?" Eleanor squared her shoulders. No, Marcus. They deserve to hear the truth from me. The microphone feedback echoed through the ballroom as Eleanor stepped up to the podium. The murmuring continued until she cleared her throat, her voice carrying across the room with practiced grace. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight. The words felt heavy in her mouth. I'm sure you've all read the papers. About Sarah Walker, about my failure. The room fell silent. Even the waiters stopped moving. Trays of champagne frozen mid-circuit. 10 years ago, a young mother came to me for help. She was sick, desperate, and alone. Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. And I turned her away. I had just started the foundation, and I was focused on big projects, big numbers. I told myself one person couldn't matter as much as helping hundreds. She paused, taking in the sea of faces. Some showed contempt, others curiosity, and a few, just a few, showed understanding. I was wrong, so terribly wrong. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them back. Sarah Walker died, leaving behind a husband and a beautiful little girl. I've spent every day since then trying to make up for what I did. But the truth is, you can't undo that kind of mistake. You can only learn from it and try to be better. The crystal glasses clinked softly as servers moved through the crowd. Eleanor gripped the podium tighter. This foundation was built on the promise of helping children in need. But what good are our grand galas and big donations if we can't see the individual faces of those who need us? Sarah Walker taught me that lesson too late. An older woman in the front row dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I haven't earned it. But I do ask that you don't let my personal failure taint the work this foundation does. Every child we help is precious. Every family we support matters. And, if there's one thing I've learned from Sarah's daughter, it's that love and second chances can heal even the deepest wounds. Her voice wavered as she continued. I failed Sarah. But her daughter Lily, that precious child, showed me what true grace looks like. She and her father James taught me that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about facing it honestly and choosing to do better. The ballroom remained silent, but something had shifted. The hostility in the air had softened, replaced by something more complex. So yes, I am the woman who turned away Sarah Walker. I am also the woman who will spend the rest of her life making sure no other mother faces that kind of rejection. Not from me, not from this foundation, not ever again. Tears now fell freely down Eleanor's cheeks, but she made no move to wipe them away. The headlines aren't wrong about what I did, but they don't tell the whole story. They don't show how one mistake can haunt you, shape you, and ultimately transform you. They don't show how the love of a child can teach you what really matters. She stepped back from the podium, her voice stronger now. I stand before you humbled but hopeful. Judge me if you must, but please, don't let my past mistakes stop you from helping the children who need us now. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Then, from the back of the room, a single person began to clap. The applause spread slowly, building, until it filled the ballroom. It wasn't the usual enthusiastic ovation her speeches received, but it carried something more valuable: understanding. Across town, in his small apartment, James sat on his worn couch, watching the local news coverage of the gala. Lily had long since gone to bed. Her favorite stuffed animal, a gift from Eleanor, clutched tight in her arms. On the screen, Eleanor's tear-stained face filled the frame as she admitted her failures. James leaned forward, struck by the raw honesty in her voice. This wasn't the polished billionaire philanthropist he'd first met in the hospital. This was someone different. Someone who had learned from her mistakes and was brave enough to own them publicly. The camera panned across the crowd's mixed reactions, but Eleanor stood tall, vulnerable, yet unashamed. James watched as she wiped away a tear, the simple gesture more genuine than any practiced speech could be. As the news segment ended, James sat in the darkness of his living room, the blue light of the television flickering across his face. Eleanor's words echoed in his mind. Love and second chances can heal even the deepest wounds. He glanced at the framed photo of Sarah on the side table, her smile forever frozen in time. The anger that had burned in his chest since reading the newspaper article began to fade, replaced by a different kind of ache. James sat in his worn armchair, the evening news still playing quietly on the TV. The screen showed Eleanor at her foundation gala, her usual confidence replaced by visible pain as cameras flashed around her. His chest felt tight, watching her stand there, alone and exposed. Lily padded into the living room in her favorite pink pajamas, clutching her stuffed elephant. Her small face looked troubled in the dim light from the TV. Without a word, she climbed into James's lap, curling against his chest, the way she always did when something was bothering her. "I miss Miss Eleanor," she said softly, playing with the ear of her elephant. "She makes the best hot chocolate, and she always knows when I need a hug." James stroked his daughter's hair, the familiar smell of her strawberry shampoo bringing a lump to his throat. "I know you do, sweetheart. Did she do something bad?" Lily asked, her eyes fixed on the TV screen where Eleanor's image still lingered. James took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "It's complicated, honey. A long time ago, before you were born, Miss Eleanor made a mistake. She didn't help someone who needed her help very much." "Was it Mommy?" Lily's voice was barely a whisper. James's hand stilled in her hair. "Yes, it was." Lily was quiet for a long moment, her small fingers tracing patterns on her elephant's trunk. Then she shifted to look up at him, her eyes showing wisdom beyond her years. "Daddy, Mommy always said people can change if we let them. Can't we let Miss Eleanor change?" The simple truth in his daughter's words hit James like a physical force. He remembered Sarah's gentle heart, how she always believed in giving people second chances. Even in their hardest times, she never lost her faith in humanity's capacity for growth. "When did you get so smart?" he asked, trying to hide how much her words had shaken him. Lily gave him a small smile. "Mommy taught me. And Miss Eleanor shows me too. She's different now, isn't she? She helps lots of people. She helps us." James thought about the past few months. Eleanor's genuine care for Lily, her patient understanding of his pride, the way she'd opened not just her home, but her heart to them. He remembered the tears in her eyes when she'd confessed her past mistake, the deep regret that still haunted her. "She takes care of me like Mommy said she would," Lily continued, hugging her elephant closer. "When I'm scared at the doctor's, she holds my hand really tight, and she never forgets my special medicine. She promised Mommy she'd look after me, and she is now, isn't she?" James swallowed hard. "Yes, she island. Then why can't we forgive her?" Lily's question was simple but profound. "Mommy would want us to." The truth of it settled deep in James's chest. Sarah had always believed in the power of forgiveness, in the possibility of redemption. She'd taught Lily those same values. Values he was now struggling to honor. "Remember when I broke your favorite teacup?" Lily asked suddenly. "I felt really bad, but you said mistakes don't make us bad people. They help us learn to be better." James couldn't help but smile at his daughter's logic. "I did say that, didn't I?" "Miss Eleanor learned to be better," Lily said firmly. "She's trying really hard to keep her promise now. And she loves us, Daddy. I can tell." James thought about Eleanor's face at the gala, the way she'd stood there accepting the public shame while still pledging to do better. She could have hidden away, could have used her wealth and power to bury the story. Instead, she'd faced it head-on, owned her mistake, and reaffirmed her commitment to helping others. "I saw her crying on TV," Lily said quietly. "She looks really sad without us." James pulled his daughter closer, feeling her small heart beating against his chest. The anger that had driven him to walk away from Eleanor suddenly felt heavy and unnecessary. Yes, she had failed Sarah once, but wasn't she doing everything in her power to make up for it now? "Do you think Mommy can see us?" Lily asked, her voice drowsy. "Do you think she's happy when we're happy?" "I think she is," James replied softly, remembering Sarah's radiant smile, her capacity for joy, even in difficult times. "Then she must be sad now," Lily murmured. "Because we're all sad without Miss Eleanor." James closed his eyes, letting his daughter's simple wisdom wash over him. Sarah had always said that Lily had an old soul, able to see truth where adults often missed it. Looking down at her now, James felt a profound gratitude for this child who carried her mother's heart. Lily yawned, snuggling closer. "Can we go see Miss Eleanor tomorrow? Please? I want to give her a big hug and tell her it's okay." James kissed her forehead, realizing the truth in her words. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten. Eleanor had made a mistake, yes, but she'd spent every day since then trying to make it right. Perhaps it was time to let go of old hurts and embrace the possibility of healing. He looked at his daughter's hopeful face and made his decision. The grand ballroom of the Hayes Foundation sparkled with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors, but the atmosphere was heavy with judgment and whispers. Eleanor Hayes stood at the podium, her shoulders straight despite the weight pressing down on them. Her black evening gown, usually a symbol of elegance, now felt like armor against the disapproving stares of Seattle's elite. "Yes, I made a terrible mistake years ago." Eleanor's voice wavered slightly as she addressed the crowd. "I turned away someone who needed help, someone who trusted me to—" The large double doors at the back of the ballroom creaked open. Heads turned, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. James Walker stood there in his best suit, the same one he'd worn to their first gala. It was slightly wrinkled and a size too big, but he carried himself with quiet dignity. Eleanor's words died in her throat. Her hands gripped the podium's edges until her knuckles turned white. The microphone picked up her sharp intake of breath, broadcasting it across the silent room. James began walking down the center aisle. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor, steady and determined. The crowd parted like water, creating a path straight to the stage. Some whispered behind raised hands, others stared openly, but James kept his eyes fixed on Eleanor. Eleanor tried to continue her speech, but her voice cracked. A tear slid down her cheek, smudging her carefully applied makeup. James reached the bottom of the stage steps. Security guards looked uncertain, glancing between him and Eleanor, waiting for a signal. Eleanor gave an almost imperceptible nod, and they stepped aside. As James climbed the steps, memories of the past few months flashed through his mind. Eleanor teaching Lily to play "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" on the piano, their shared laughter in the garden. Quiet evenings talking about hopes and fears. But most of all, he remembered Lily's words. "People can change if we let them." He reached the podium where Eleanor stood frozen, her emerald eyes wide with surprise and hope. The microphone picked up their breathing, broadcasting this intimate moment to hundreds of watching faces. "James," Eleanor whispered, barely audible. "I'm so sorry. I know I can never make up for—" "You're right," James interrupted gently. "You can't change the past." He paused, letting the words sink in. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath. Eleanor's shoulders slumped slightly, but she maintained her composure, years of public appearances serving her well. Yet those who knew her could see the pain in her eyes, the tremble in her lower lip. James reached for the microphone, his calloused hand brushing against Eleanor's manicured fingers. She released her grip on the podium, stepping back slightly to give him space. The spotlight felt hot on his face, and public speaking had never been his strong suit, but he knew what needed to be said. "My wife Sarah," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "taught our daughter that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. It's about choosing to see the person standing in front of you today." Eleanor's breath caught audibly. A few feet away, cameras flashed, documenting every moment of this unexpected scene. "I've spent the last few days angry," James continued, "thinking about what might have been different if help had come when Sarah needed it. But then I looked at my daughter, our daughter now in a way, and I saw something I hadn't seen since before Sarah died. Pure joy." He turned to face Eleanor directly now, his voice growing stronger. "This woman," he gestured toward Eleanor, "gave my daughter back her laughter. That's the only truth that matters." The ballroom remained silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. The judgment had given way to something softer, something like understanding. Eleanor stood perfectly still, tears flowing freely now, no longer caring about her careful makeup or public image. James stepped toward her, taking her hand in his. It trembled in his grasp, but he held it firmly, offering the strength she had so often given to others. The warmth of his touch seemed to bring her back to herself, and she squeezed his hand in return. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the crowded ballroom seemed to fade away. All the wealth, the scandal, the past mistakes, none of it mattered as much as this simple truth. Two broken people choosing to help each other heal. When Eleanor finally found her voice again, it was steady and clear. "Sometimes," she said into the microphone, still holding James's hand, "God gives us second chances we don't deserve. And sometimes, those second chances come with lessons about grace that we desperately need to learn." James nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. The camera flashes continued, but neither of them noticed anymore. They stood together on that stage, hands clasped, a living testament to the power of forgiveness and the possibility of change. The ballroom remained hushed, bearing witness to this moment of redemption. The whispers had stopped, replaced by something that felt almost like reverence. In the midst of all the glittering wealth and social prestige, it was this simple act of forgiveness that commanded true respect. Together they stood, the billionaire philanthropist and the humble single father, their joined hands bridging worlds that had seemed impossibly far apart just months ago. And in that moment, both knew with absolute certainty that Sarah would have smiled. The gentle spring breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers through James's open kitchen window. Eleanor stood at his worn counter, her designer blouse rolled up at the sleeves as she kneaded pizza dough. Her perfectly styled hair now had a light dusting of flour, but her smile was brighter than James had ever seen it. "Like this, Miss Eleanor?" Lily asked, her small hands covered in sticky dough as she tried to copy Eleanor's movements. "Perfect, sweetheart," Eleanor said, reaching over to guide Lily's hands. "You're a natural baker." James leaned against the doorframe, taking in the scene before him. His modest kitchen had never felt so alive. The walls that had witnessed so many quiet dinners now echoed with laughter and chatter. Max, the golden retriever puppy Eleanor had given Lily, sat at their feet, hoping for dropped bits of cheese. "Daddy," Lily called out, "come help us make the pizzas." James pushed off from the doorframe and joined them at the counter. "I don't know, Princess. Cooking was never my strong suit. That's why we eat so much mac and cheese." Eleanor bumped his shoulder playfully with hers. "Well then, it's a good thing I'm here to expand your culinary horizons, isn't it?" The casual touch sent warmth through James's chest. It felt natural now, these little moments of connection between them. The anger that had flared when he'd first read that newspaper article had mellowed into understanding. Eleanor's public admission of her past mistakes and her determination to make things right had shown him the true measure of her character. "Here," Eleanor said, handing him some dough. "Just follow my lead." James's attempts at shaping the pizza dough were clumsy at best. Lily giggled as his crust ended up looking more like a map of Texas than a circle. Eleanor stepped behind him, her hands covering his to help guide his movements. "Gentle but firm," she instructed softly, her breath warm against his ear. "Like this." The dough slowly took shape under their combined efforts. James was acutely aware of Eleanor's presence, of how right it felt to have her here in his kitchen, teaching his daughter to cook, making his home feel complete again. "Can I put the sauce on now?" Lily asked, bouncing on her toes. "Go ahead, sweetie," Eleanor said, stepping back from James. "Just remember what we said about not using too much." Lily nodded seriously and began spreading sauce with intense concentration. Max wagged his tail, tracking her every move in case anything fell his way. "I never thought I'd see the day when a billionaire would be making pizzas in my kitchen," James said quietly to Eleanor. She dusted some flour off her nose, leaving another streak in its place. "I never thought I'd feel so at home in a kitchen this small." Her eyes met his. "But it's not about the size of the space, is it? It's about the people you share it with." James reached out and brushed the flour from her cheek. "You're right. It's about family." Eleanor's eyes welled up at the word, but her smile never wavered. "Family," she repeated softly. "Look!" Lily exclaimed, holding up her finished pizza. "I made a smiley face with the cheese." "That's amazing, Princess," James said, moving to inspect her creation. "Should we put it in the oven?" While the pizza's baked, They sat at the small kitchen table playing Go Fish. Lily won every hand, though James suspected Eleanor might have been helping her win by showing her cards on purpose. The timer dinged, filling the kitchen with the aroma of melted cheese and fresh bread. "Our first family dinner," Lily declared, as they sat down to eat, making both adults pause mid-bite. James watched Eleanor's reaction carefully. She set down her slice and reached for Lily's hand. "You know what, sweetheart? You're absolutely right. This is our first family dinner." After dinner, James and Eleanor worked side by side washing dishes while Lily played with Max in the living room. The comfortable silence between them spoke volumes about how far they'd come. "Thank you," James said suddenly, handing her a plate to dry. "For helping with dishes?" Eleanor asked, though her tone suggested she knew that wasn't what he meant. "For not giving up on us, even when I pushed you away." Eleanor set down her dish towel and turned to face him. "I couldn't give up. Not again. When I saw Lily in that hospital room that night, it was like God was giving me a second chance to keep my promise to Sarah. But it became so much more than that." James nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. What had started as obligation had grown into genuine love, for Lily. And for him too. "Daddy," Lily called from the living room. "Can you read me a bedtime story?" "You too, Miss Eleanor." They found Lily already in her pajamas, clutching her favorite book, and Max curled up at the foot of her bed. James sat on one side of the bed, Eleanor on the other, as they took turns reading pages. Lily's eyes grew heavy as the story progressed, and soon she was fast asleep, one arm wrapped around her puppy. James turned off the bedside lamp, leaving only the soft glow of the nightlight. Eleanor stood beside him, watching Lily sleep peacefully. "I begged you not to leave the hospital because I knew God was giving me a second chance," Eleanor whispered to him, "and I didn't want to lose it." Golden sunlight filtered through the oak trees in Central Park, casting dancing shadows on the winding pathway. Eleanor Hayes walked hand in hand with James Walker, their fingers intertwined as naturally as if they'd been doing this for years instead of months. Ahead of them, 7-year-old Lily skipped along, her pink dress bouncing with each step as she led her golden retriever puppy, Max, by his blue leash. "Slow down a bit, sweetie," James called out, though his voice carried more amusement than concern. The past few months had seen Lily's health improve dramatically. The combination of better medical care and happiness had worked wonders. "But Max wants to see the ducks, Daddy." Lily turned back, her face glowing with excitement. The puppy wagged his tail eagerly, pulling gently on his leash. Eleanor squeezed James's hand. "She's got so much energy now," she said softly. "Remember how worried we were just a few months ago?" James nodded, his throat tightening at the memory of that frightening night in the emergency room. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed." He glanced at Eleanor, taking in her casual weekend appearance. Jeans, a simple blouse, and minimal makeup. So different from the imposing billionaire he'd first met, yet somehow more beautiful. Lily's laughter rang out as Max discovered a butterfly, the puppy bouncing around trying to catch it. The sound drew smiles from passing strangers, and Eleanor felt her heart swell. This was what she'd been missing all those years, of focusing solely on her foundation work, the simple joy of family. "Come on," Lily waved them forward. "The ice cream cart is here." They caught up to her at the small cart, where an elderly vendor was already smiling at Lily's enthusiasm. James reached for his wallet, but Eleanor gently touched his arm, their old argument now more of a loving joke between them. "My treat," she said with a wink. "You spoil us," he replied, but his eyes were warm. "Chocolate for me, please." Lily bounced on her toes. "And vanilla for Max? Dogs can't have ice cream, silly," James chuckled, ruffling her hair. "But Eleanor said we could get him a special doggy ice cream from the pet store later," Lily protested, making both adults laugh. They found a wooden bench near the duck pond, Lily sitting between them as they enjoyed their ice cream. Max lay at their feet, his tail thumping contentedly against the ground. A cool breeze rustled the leaves above them, carrying the sweet scent of nearby flowering bushes. "Look at the baby ducks!" Lily pointed with her ice cream cone, nearly dropping it in her excitement. Eleanor steadied her hand just in time, the gesture so maternal it made James's heart skip. "They're following their mama," Eleanor observed, watching the line of ducklings paddle after their mother. "Just like Max follows you around everywhere," Lily beamed, reaching down to pat her puppy's head. "He's the best present ever." "Thank you again, Eleanor." "You're very welcome, sweetheart." Eleanor's voice was soft with emotion. These moments, these simple, precious moments, were worth more than all her billions. After finishing their ice cream, they continued their walk. Lily ran ahead again, this time to a playground she spotted. James and Eleanor settled on another bench to watch her play, Max curled up at their feet. "I never thought I'd have this," Eleanor admitted quietly, her head resting against James's shoulder. "After what happened with Sarah, I thought I'd lost my chance at real happiness." James wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer. "Sarah would be happy, you know. Seeing Lily so loved, so cared for, that's all she ever wanted." Eleanor blinked back tears. "Sometimes I see her and Lily's smile. It's like I've been given this miraculous second chance to keep my promise." "You've done more than keep a promise," James said, turning to face her. "You've helped create something new, something whole." They watched as Lily made friends with another little girl on the swings, their shared laughter carrying across the playground. The afternoon sun painted everything in warm, honey-colored light, and a sense of peace settled over them. "Remember that night at the hospital?" Eleanor asked. "When I begged you not to leave?" James nodded. "You said you had a feeling God was giving you one last chance. I was so scared you'd walk away," she admitted. "But something in my heart knew that you and Lily were meant to be part of my life. That together we could heal each other's broken pieces." Lily's voice called out to them. "Daddy! Eleanor! Watch me go higher!" They waved, both smiling as she pumped her legs on the swing, reaching for the sky. Max barked encouragingly, his tail wagging as he watched his young owner play. After a while, the sun began to sink lower, casting long shadows across the park. Lily returned to them, pleasantly tired from playing, and snuggled between them on the bench. Max laid his head in her lap, and she stroked his soft fur. "Can we do this every weekend?" she asked sleepily. "Of course we can, sweetheart," Eleanor promised, smoothing Lily's hair. As the evening approached, they decided to head home. Lily walked ahead again, this time more slowly, chatting quietly to Max as she led him along the path. James and Eleanor followed, their hands finding each other naturally. They paused beneath a massive oak tree, its branches creating a canopy of rustling leaves above them. The setting sun filtered through the foliage, creating patterns of light and shadow on their faces. "Thank you," James said simply, turning to face Eleanor. "For what?" "For not giving up. For showing me that sometimes the best things in life come from giving second chances." Eleanor's eyes shimmered with tears as she looked up at him. James leaned down, pressing his lips gently against hers. The kiss was soft and sweet, filled with promise and newfound peace. When they parted, their foreheads rested together for a moment, sharing the same breath, the same joy. Ahead of them, Lily turned and smiled at the sight of them together. Her family was complete now, different from what she'd once had, but just as full of love. Max wagged his tail as if in agreement, and together they all continued their walk through the park, heading home as the day's golden light faded into evening's gentle dusk. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of James Walker, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.